There are certain qualities, traits, attributes that should be just part of our identity as God's people. But one creates probably more controversy than everything else combined. And that's just the thought, the concept of generosity. We often, not always, but often get one of two extremes, either the negative, what does it cost me? What do I have to give up? People looking for a way out of it. Or the other extreme, what's the blessing? They're looking for the reward that goes with it. What we'll see today in this story is we're going to see someone who was generous with no expectations, just to bless. And we will see with no expectations how it profoundly changed their life. Generosity is one of those traits, qualities that should be just a core part of our identity as God's people. Unfortunately, often it provokes extreme responses. On one hand, we get this portion of people of faith who literally will do the math. Oh, if I'm going to do this, here's the expected blessing that will come from it, what I'm looking for. I don't think that's really God's intention. I don't see that as well balanced. But is also to the other extreme, we get those who, they're fearful, they're negative. What does it cost me? I worked so hard for this. Is there another way for us to do this? Do I have to? What we'll see in this story is how generosity just flowed from their heart. In fact, they were insistent on being generous. I think that should really be that well-balanced identity that we have. But because of their insistent generosity, we'll see how it changed their life in a profound way. Now, if you want to follow along, the story is in 2 Kings chapter 4. And it starts in verse 8. Now, Elisha, as you're probably aware, is this amazing, mighty man of God. He's a prophet. God used him to do unbelievable miracles. And he's coming to the area. Now, this woman literally didn't just offer, but she was insistent that he came to her house for his meals. She was insistent that he allow them to bless him. See, she wasn't waiting to see if he asked for anything. She literally, proactively, insistently required him to come to her house for his meals. And what we see is there was no expectation. She just wanted to be a blessing to the man of God. And I think that should be kind of a great outlook on our identity. In our daily lives, how can we bless not just the men and women of God, but everyone we come in contact with no expectations? Now, that generosity continued. So what would happen? Every time he came to the area, he would come there for the meals. And it went one step further. She went to her husband and said, let's build him a room. That when he comes to the area, he has a place to stay. Again, notice, nowhere do we see him asking for help, but she is taking the lead. She is realizing, how can we help this man of God? What can we do for him? And that should be, again, our outlook, rather than waiting for someone to ask us to help. She did. She was insistent he came there for meals. And then she goes to her husband, let's build him a room. Now, when they did that, they went to the absolute extreme. They built it, they furnished it, bed, desk, you name it, everything he would need. And it's not clear, but it would appear that room was big enough not just for him, but also for his servant who would travel with him. See, they not only were generous, but they made sure that nothing was left undone. So the day came when Elisha is staying there and he calls the woman and says, what can we do for you? Now, this is where I see that she had no expectations. And one thing we'll notice is, was this out of just absolute humility, or frankly, had she given up hope on her dreams? Because her response is, I don't need anything, my family takes care of me. Literally, when he asks, what can we do for you? She didn't ask for a thing. She just left it at that. Now, Elisha continued on, and he went to his servant and says, find out what we can do for her. And the servant came back and said, she has no children. She doesn't have a son. Now, this is where we see, was this humility? Or was this the fact that she had actually given up hope? Because he comes to her and he says, this time next year, you will have a son. And what we see from her is this response of, please don't tell me that. Are you sure? Because don't get my hopes up unless it's absolutely true. See, she had lived with this heartache for years, but she didn't come in generosity going, if I do this, will God do that? No. Again, we see just the purity in that generosity of just to be a blessing. Now, what do we see in this story? We see that, sure enough, a year later, she has that son. That deepest desire was fulfilled. Now, this is where we would love the story to end, and it's a happy story. It's a great fairy tale. Generosity changed her life. But unfortunately, the reality is, as is often in life caused pain. And what do we see happen? This is, to me, so profound, because her generosity not only brought her this amazing blessing, but as we'll see in a moment, that generosity opened the door for her to be bold when she needed to be. So we see later that the son, the child, he has a headache, and he goes to lay down, and they go to check on him, and he has died. And her immediate response is to go find Elisha. She doesn't tell her husband. She shuts the door, says to the servants, don't tell anyone. And she goes to look for Elisha. And here's where we'll see the boldness. What we see is she comes to Elisha. Now, she had to take the initiative. And this is something for you and I to realize. There are times when we want God to move, but we need to take initiative. And here's why I can say that. So Elisha and the servant see her coming. And Elisha makes a profound statement. He says, God has not shown me why she's here. See, Elisha had not heard from God. She had to take the initiative. But she's not only taking the initiative, as we'll see, profound boldness. So she comes and she tells Elijah the issue. And Elijah, absolutely, he hands his staff to the servant and says, don't stop for anything, don't talk to anyone, but go and lay this staff on the child. But she had boldness. And we're going to see that boldness paid off. She literally says, I'm not going anywhere until you promise to go with me. See, even though she saw Elijah's intention through the servant to bring healing, she wasn't going to accept that. And her prior generosity had opened the door to be able to be bold. She now had the relationship where, and you notice she didn't say, look at all I've done for you. But all of that prior generosity had opened the door to her ability to be bold. And what does she do? I'm not going anywhere until you promise to go with me. And what do we see? So they come to the servant. He's laid the staff on the child, and it didn't work. There was no change. And so Elisha goes in, he lays on the child. There was an entire process. But basically, here's the thing. God healed him, revived him, brought him back from the dead. So what happened? We saw that generosity with no expectations. In fact, an insistent generosity led to her greatest desires being fulfilled. But then when life brought pain, as it always does, she was able, because of that prior generosity, to be bold and see God move in a powerful way again. And it all went back to that generosity. See, if she had never done that, if she had never been insistent, we would have never seen this story. We would in heaven find this couple who just loved God but never saw their dreams fulfilled. But instead, what do we see? Out of that insistent generosity, with no expectations, God fulfilling their greatest desires. And when life brought pain, God brought resurrection. God brought revival. He brought his power and brought that dream back to life.